Hi everyone, my name is Edwin. I am really interested in problem solving and optimizing personal effectiveness, specifically using the ideas of David Deutsch and more broadly the philosophy of critical rationalism, which is a theory of knowledge and how knowledge is created and improved upon. In the past episodes, we've already been covering and discussing how our minds interpret problems and then also highlighting the various pitfalls in this process and how we can then come up with a optimized or a better problem statement ourselves to make sure that we're set up for a good problem resolution. Today we'll be covering how we come up with solutions for these problems or candidate solutions for these problems. So we'll firstly cover how creativity works, or what we do know about how creativity works and what we can do to enhance it. And then we're going to cover some various pitfalls or mistakes we often make using some examples. Okay, but let's start with how creativity works. So creativity is the process of coming up with new ideas and theorized potential solutions. What is happening is that we are actually rearranging or adjusting or recombining various ideas in our minds to come up with a new idea. And this really is a new idea in the sense that it has not occurred before. Humans are the only entities capable of coming up with these new ideas through creativity. If we would have already figured out how it really works, we would have had AGI by now, but we do not. We're still figuring out how that works, and there's a whole field related to it. But what we do know already about it is that it largely takes place in the unconscious. So this combining or rearranging of ideas is happening in the unconscious, and then the results get surfaced to our conscious minds, and then there we can consider its aptitude or how good it is, and maybe criticize it. But again, those criticisms are using criteria that we also conjecture ourselves. So it's a very intertwined process of coming up with ideas and then criticizing them, coming up with another idea or another improvement. It might sound like a random process, but it's very much the opposite actually. It's really targeted. We come up with ideas aimed at solving specific problems, so they're also all focused on that, and we really improve upon previous ideas in a focused way, not in a random, undirected way. And what we can do to optimize our creativity is mainly to let it flow freely, to stay away from too much intervention and trying to stare at the page and then try to have the ideas come. We know that ideas do not typically come up this way. They come up most favorably when our minds are more relaxed and we're, for instance, working for a stroll, or we are in the shower, and sometimes even in our sleeps ideas can come to us. So being unencumbered is usually a great way to solve problems. So we have the idea of the problem situation in our mind, and then we just have creativity in the background coming up with ideas and resurfacing to the conscious, and sometimes that is a great idea. And we can also try to get this engine going a little bit by trying to come up with ideas and not criticize them too early, because quite often we impede our own process of creativity. So we're too critical early on, or we shut down ideas right away, or we run with them way too quickly. So we take the first idea that comes to mind and just go with that. This is all kind of impeding the creative process that we all have naturally within us. So if you can visualize it more as a faucet through which creativity and new ideas come through, we want to make sure this faucet is unclogged and also flowing freely. And this is kind of how we can think of optimizing our creativity. That being said, we do not have a good model of how creativity works. These are techniques or metaphors that we've just found out experimentally and through experience to work well. Okay, so now we can move on to specific examples of where we might go wrong with coming up with candidate solutions. Typically, this all branches out of the big problem of stopping too soon. We stop coming up with solutions too soon, and we move on too quickly. In the first instance that we can think of, it's usually due to laziness or a conditioned response that we should just not seek further because we're not smart enough, or don't waste your time, etc. This is just stopping too early and taking the first idea you see and think that's the only option there is, and it's not great. For example, an individual might not like their job and they think, okay, the only option is to either quit or to toughen through, and then because of lazy thinking, they will not come up with alternative ideas. The second instance of this problem going wrong is when we see a problem situation, and we assume that there are a lot of hard requirements or limitations that we simply cannot get around, and we just see a lot of blockages in our way. If we think of the individual who doesn't like their job, they might be worried that, I have bills to pay, obviously, and I have to feed my family, and there is no really good job opportunities out there in my area, and therefore the solution space is just extremely constrained and there's just not much I can do about this. But with some extra creativity, there are always options that we can come up with to circumvent or find ways around these limitations, which are very local limitations always. They're not some like global force of nature. In our example, the individual could go to their manager and ask, are there any other open vacancies or places in this organization that I can fulfill something that is more aligned with what I like? They can be even more proactive and really go ahead and already propose an adjusted role or schedule and how your work will be picked up by someone else and really shaping your own role and then coming to your manager with that. And let's say that, okay, there is nothing in your job, it just is a dead end. There is still the option of, okay, maybe in my spare time I will work on some completely unrelated side project, which I will hope to support myself with at some point. And when that income comes from that, you will gradually reduce your working hours until the point where you can switch fully to this new job that you enjoy more. So there are always these creative ways we can solve problems, which leads me to the third mistake that we fall into, which is thinking that there must be an inherent concession to be made in any situation, that there's like a fixed pie and it's always about giving some and taking some and making concessions and compromises that neither party is really entirely happy with, but still somewhat satisfactory. And this comes from the mistaken view that there is some sort of fixed pie in reality. But this is actually not the case. These zero-sum situations where there is a fixed pie are always artificially created by humans. So a basketball league is a good example where, yes, only one person can be the champion and the other teams have to lose for that to happen. But this is an artificially constrained game. It's not some law of nature that's determining there can only be one basketball champion. The same thing plays out in like status games that humans play in politics or celebrities. There can only be so many politicians in Congress and there can only be so many Oscar winners. It's very constrained and artificial, but it's not a law of nature. So in reality, what we could do is, if you still want to be a movie star or politician, you could find your own path and not play this game. Choose not to play the games that are already out there, but forge your own path. There is nothing in reality from stopping you that. There's no law of nature, there's no inherent limitations, there is no resource scarcity. For much of history, we think that there's always a resource scarcity and we're about to run out and therefore we must conserve what we have. But this is also a false conception. We thought that oil was a scarce resource and like our only sustainable way to get energy, but it turns out there's many other sources, even renewable sources such as solar and wind, and of course nuclear is a great source. So actually it's a scarcity of ideas that we have in reality, not a scarcity of resources. Like even the most limited resources we can consider on Earth, for instance, like let's say gold is like a fixed set. We could still manufacture it in a lab once our technology gets good enough. Or we could harvest it from some faraway asteroid or moon and bring the gold from the outer universe. These are all physically possible transformations and actions that can take place. And the only thing limiting us is ideas. So this brings us back to the situation of assuming someone has to lose. This again is a wrong and mistaken view. If we take an example where an individual is not happy with their compensation at their job, they can go to their boss and say, hey, I want a raise because I don't think I'm compensated fairly. But the boss says, yeah, I understand you, but there's just the revenue I'm getting out of it is not, the profit margins are too thin, I cannot pay you this much extra, it's just simply not financially viable. And then you have a situation where if you go for a compromise, then your boss will just give you a little raise and he won't be happy with that because it's cutting into his profit margins. And you're also not happy with that because you wanted way more than that. So that's not a good solution. And what we should do is use more creativity to come up with various other solutions that are more win-win. For instance, we could think of a scheme where, hey, I can get paid a bonus based on the amount of value I deliver or sales targets I reach, and therefore this problem that you had is not a problem anymore because the risk is gone, because if I do not bring in revenue, you will also not have to pay me, but if I do bring in revenue, you win because you get the majority chunk of it, and I also get a kickback of some of the money I brought in, and that's a win-win situation. So opting for win-win solutions is always a really important part of coming up with creative solutions and candidate ideas, and the main lesson really today is to not stop too early, to not assume that your problem situation only has a fixed set of solutions or that those are really unfavorable. Unless you're being physically coerced or in a prison or really mentally tortured, unless those things are the case, it's almost always possible to come up with ideas that will at least make your problem situation a little bit better and free you up more so that you have a space to come up with more ideas and improve it that way. The solution space that we can come up with and the options that we have are really much wider than we probably initially consider. Alright, so now we're at the point that we've created many solutions and we have a whole range of solutions to choose from. The next step is indeed making this decision of what we're going to act on. That will be the topic of the next video. But for now, I hope you enjoyed and found it helpful. If you want to learn more about critical rationalism and really the epistemology or the theory of knowledge behind all of this, I would highly recommend looking at David Deutsch's books, specifically The Beginning of Infinity. If you want to be more on the forefront of new research based on critical rationalism, do give Conjecture Institute a look. And if you want to know more about problem solving and optimizing our own personal effectiveness using the ideas of David Deutsch and critical rationalism, subscribe to my channel and have a look at my upcoming book, The Four Acts, which is a problem solving framework based on those ideas. Links to all of those are below. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Bye bye.